Perhaps it has something to do with environment, because trout are prime indicators of water's organic health, in which we all have a stake. Perhaps it has something to do with books and paintings, because the extensive written and iconographic records on trout are among the absolute glories of sporting literature and art. And then perhaps it is simple as saying that in their welcoming familiarity as a species, trout suit my sensibility, speak directly.
Oh yeah, it is you. Oh yeah, it is you.
Hi everyone, Tim Schultz here. Hey, I hope you're doing well, and I want to thank you for listening to the Reading the Water podcast. As always, I really appreciate you being here. Hey, on this episode, we'll be talking with the writer, poet, and distinguished professor of Anglish, Bob DeMott. Bob's the author of several scholarly works on John Steinbeck, his own fly fishing memoir, Angling Days, and he's also the author and editor of a terrific fly fishing anthology dedicated to Nick Lyons called Astream, which includes stories from a who's who of fishing writers, including the award-winning actor Michael Keaton. Bob will share his thoughts on why there's so much good writing in fly fishing, tell us stories from his relationships with Nick Lyons and Jim Harrison, and set us straight on the most famous misquote about fishing. Bob's a skilled angler, accomplished scholar, and a terrific fishing buddy. So let's get this started.
I said pressure drop, oh pressure, oh now pressure's gonna drop on you.
Well, Bob, how are you doing today?
Okay. Doing good, Tim.
Okay, great. You're at home?
I am. Yeah, I am. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And
Kate was in Colorado last weekend to see her older sister and brother, and so I was here with the dogs and tried to get some work done around the house and that kind of thing. So yeah.
okay. Well, Bob, we want to talk about two topics that I know are dear to your heart, and one is angling and one is English. And I have seen, and I've seen you write about it, and I've seen other people talk about it, this concept of merging not only those two acts, but those two words into one word called Anglish.
Yeah.
And I know you're familiar with it, but tell us about it. Where did it come from, and what does it mean?
That's not original with me. If I remember correctly, one of the early editors of Fly Fisherman magazine had a column called Anglish Spoken Here. I think it was Don Zahner, if I'm not mistaken. And years ago, back in the earliest 70s, I was teaching at OU, Ohio University. I was teaching a graduate course on poetry, and we were doing the most esoteric, arcane book of poems in the world, the Cantos by Ezra Pound. And there's a I came across in preparation, there's a canto, I think it's 51, in which he talks about the granum and some fly tying patterns and so on. And I got interested in that and discovered that he had lifted a lot of what he used from the Bolker volume of The Art of Angling. And so I went on a search for that. I ended up at Yale and found a copy of the first edition and researched it there and found out the things that he had, borrowed. And that's the way he worked his poetry. It wasn't a straight narrative. He would all intersperse with sample. We would call it sampling now, but he would intersperse with quotations from other writers and so on. And there's a whole section in there about fishing the granum and dry flies and whatnot. And I wrote up a piece about it, and it was published in a journal that the University of Maine brought out. It was called Pyduma, and it was a journal devoted to Ezra Pound scholarship. And so they published that article, and I never had much thought about where that would go. But a couple of years later, a professor named William Frohock, who was quite a well-known scholar of literature at Harvard, turned out he was also a fly fisherman. And he saw the article in that very arcane literary scholarly magazine, and he wrote to me. He said he was very interested in that kind of thing. And he said, I'm gonna send it off to fly fishermen because this should have a wider audience. So apparently he knew Don Zahner. I think that was who it was.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of months later, I got a note from the fly fishermen that said they want to reprint it. So, and I was happy with that because I got paid. Because if you publish a scholarly journal, you get a line on your bibliography and no money. But anyway, they had real money at fly fishermen. The whole point of it was that they asked somebody to vet the article, and it was Nick Lyons. And Nick was a PhD in American literature. He had got his degree from the University of Michigan, and he was teaching at Hunter at the time. And so he read the article, and he wrote me a note just out of the blue. He said how much he enjoyed the article. And he said, I've waited a long time for somebody to write about that canto who knew about fly fishing. Anyway, that's how it got started. But it was in that section called English Spoken Here, and I think that was attributable to Zahner. And it just became a metaphor in a lot of ways. Over the years, I kind of thought about it, and then I started thinking about the relationship between fly fishing and writing, and and it was one of those classic cases of one thing leads to another. You don't know, the horizon is there, and as you move toward it, it keeps moving away from you.
Yeah.
We think you got it nailed down, but it's already on the move and going. But it just struck me over the years. I just had this little kind of, how any kind of aficionado, we have these little quirky assemblages, and we say, one of my quirky assemblages was trying to figure out all the English professors who were fly fishermen, English professors, writers, novelists, poets, and so on. And, I compiled quite a list. And then as it turned out, I became friendly with some of them as well. And it just kept sort of grabbed hold of me. You know what I mean? I couldn't shake it. This idea that there was a real intimate relationship between writing and its protocols and it's the process you go through to produce something worthwhile. And it just became kind of an obsession with me in a lot of ways. The end result of it, well, in one sense, the end result of it was that book I did a number of years, 10 years ago or so, called Astream, American Writers on Fly Fishing.
Yeah.
And that book is dedicated to Nick because of what he meant to me as a mentee, so to speak, but also what he meant to the community of fly fishing writers, which is quite enormous. So it was, there are 30 essays in there by all of them, 26 of them, I think, if I remember correctly, are original for that book. Yeah. 4 or 5 other ones had been printed earlier, but were revised. The authors revised them for that book. Mm-hmm. It was kind of and it had, I think I had 5 or 6 women fly fishing writers in it as well. It was kind of a new departure 12 years ago or so. And everybody wrote about their passion, which was writing and fishing. And to me, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, a lot of the authors in that collection were predictable from my perspective when I first read the book. I wasn't surprised to see them there. Some were a little more surprising, but I would have to say and this maybe says more about me and my own background, none were more surprising than to see Michael Keaton have a story. How did that come about? How did you have Michael Keaton write a fly fishing story?
It came about through Tom McGuane. Tom is a good friend of Michael's. They fished together quite a bit. If you ever saw that bonefish series that he and Brokaw and Keaton were involved in, what the heck was the name of it? Buccaneers and Bones. It was on TV for a number of years. So Keaton is he's a serious fly fisher, and
And a good writer.
yeah,
That's a great story. Yeah.
Recently, somebody asked me about it. Did an interview with a British magazine, and they asked me about how that book came about. And I said, well, you find out all wonderful. It's like fishing. There's wonderful serendipity. Whoever knew that Michael Keaton not only fished but wrote well about it, or that Russell Chatham was working on an angling autobiography when he died, and then Dana Stroper had left after had died, but had left an unpublished piece about Spring Creek fishing. And all these came into Astream. I was really, really lucky. I just followed the leads out, to try to get in touch with people who might put me in place to be able to utilize that material with permissions.
Right.
So it was just one of those things. But Keaton that was fun. That was really, really fun. We had one little thing in common besides knowing Tom McGuane. He and I both went to Kent State, and he was an undergraduate there, and I did my PhD there.
Oh, really?
A very, very thin web of attachment. But and I think I mentioned that to him in a couple of emails, and he was not impressed. But anyway, it was easy to work with. Took advice. I think we went through 3 or 4 drafts, and it worked. It was delightful to have him. He's very passionate about it, and that was great.
That is great. That's it. So
and all the place. I mean, I was already friendly with Jim Harrison and Tom and Russell. I knew by through them, and others, other writers who I knew very well. Craig Nova, for instance, who wrote this absolutely wonderful book called Brookshot and the Writing Life. It's just an absolute gem. And he's an absolutely terrific novelist, and I don't think quite gets his due. He's really fabulous. Anyway, there were several like that in there. And anyway, it was a lot of fun.
I've asked other people this same question, and there's a lot of passions and pastimes and ways people spend their time. Obviously, fly fishing is one of them, but a lot of people play golf. Now they play pickleball, and they go on hikes, and they like to ride bikes. And it seems to me, and it could say more about me than it does about the actual truth out there. But there's an awful lot of writing about fly fishing, but I don't see it as much, or I don't know. Maybe you can address that. But let's assume for a moment that fly fishing stands out in a sense, that there's an awful lot of very good writing. Actually, there's a lot of bad writing too, I suppose. But why? What is it about fly fishing that attracts people to write about it?
It has an allure. I think it has there's some basic problem solving involved in it, which is basic to writing as well. And it, particularly when you think about writing about trout fishing, it happens to take place in really wonderful, awe-inspiring geographies. People respond to that landscape, I think, in a lot of ways. There's a lot of relationships between casting a line and laying down a line of prose or poetry, trying to get something to bite, whether it's a writer, and yet keep yourself open a little bit for some surprises but and also the other thing too is that the history of writing about fly fishing is 500 years old. I mean, writing, and there's an enormous historical presence about it. Starting even before Isaac Walton, although he's sort of the fountainhead for many people who can't come to the art. So I think it has a built-in immediacy of tradition in it. And I think particularly in the sort of fractious times that we live in now, where everything seems to be up for grabs and everything that seems ephemeral, and it's like water spilling through our fingers in almost every area of our lives, that there's a kind of solidity to, that tradition. And I think it's I think, again, I use that word alluring. I think it's exciting to people, and it's that part of that constant quest to figure out how understanding the past can somehow infiltrate our present moment, help us think about issues about environment, climate, angling, ethics, philosophy, whatever it happens to be. And I think there's an open field there in which all these vectors sort of come together, and the metaphor is fishing. If you think about it, it's an act, it's a practice, it's a skill, it's a physical, it's a physical set of operations, so to speak, but it's also a metaphor. So, I'm fishing around for an answer. I'm fishing for the sweater I left in the back of the car. You can see that metaphor working in hunting too. I'm hunting for a good bargain. You know what I mean? I mean, they're almost built in as both, practices or skills or physical actions, but they are also metaphors. That's what we love, metaphors, which is a reaching beyond. It's a casting from reality to whatever the next level is, metaphysical, philosophical. For some people, it's spiritual. There's an enormous amount being done on the spirituality of fly fishing now, and you could argue that there are equal number of kind of caveats in the press now about how organized religion it doesn't have quite the same hold in certain areas as others. People are looking for some kind of spiritual answer to things, and fishing seems to gives you solitude, it gives you some kind of immediacy with an other. I think about that other. Could be mystical, could be mythical, could be spiritual, could be just simply nature, whatever that happens to be. That's a very powerful intellectual, conceptual, set of operative things, ideas going on. Yeah. It really makes it so attractive. And the literature of fly fishing it's excellent. I mean, there are so many great fly fishing writers, not only in the past, but we're living in I've said this many times, we're living in a golden age of really perceptive, insightful, well-earned fly fishing writing, particularly. And for a lot of people, or for me particularly, it starts with Nick Lyons.
Right.
Starts with Russell Chatham, who was a little bit more of an outlier, but wrote beautifully about fishing, and maybe as much as anybody else, Tom McGuane, who the longest it's just a blockbuster of a book. And the great thing about that book, I think, is that he has this little, the understory in that book is that, he says, get a life. You're going to be a professional fisherman and spend all your time fishing. Get a life. And I don't mean that in an insulting way. I mean, I think if you look at the really good books, the really fine, standout books in fly fishing literature, they're written by people who are not professional fishermen. That's a lot. And look at right now. David Coggin's 2 books, terrific stuff. Chris Dombrowski, a fly fishing guide, certainly, but also an academic at the University of Montana, writing top level stuff. A British writer, Malachy Talak, and there are a number of others.
Yeah. Bob, on that.
Yeah.
So there's certain characteristics that make a good story. regardless of what you're writing about. They're, just writing well, descriptive, concise, avoid cliches, all of those things. But outside of the things that might apply to any topic you're writing on, what makes a good, in your opinion, what makes a good fly fishing story? Or is it like the old pornography?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer because sometimes you would think a good fly fishing story would be like the model would be like Moby Dick. Like, a guy is so obsessed with his quarry that he ends up, being killed by it.
Mm-hmm.
There's this great narrative arc, and confronts the blah blah, and that's true. I think one of the apertures, so to speak, that work in a lot of fly fishing stories or books is that old lighting out for the territory motif, that's been with American literature for 150 years, where you set off from home for whatever reason, and you go into the wilderness, and you camp and you fish, and then you come back and you write about it. That's a paradigm, I think, that covers a lot of American literature, and that's one kind of possibility for a great story, but it's not the only one. And to me, it's hard to answer that question. I'm not trying to evade it, but
Sure.
It's hard to answer it because there are times when you want the adventure of that story. Nick Lyons spending several summers at Spring Creek in Montana and writing about it. That's a classic, going away from home, encountering the landscape, learning from it, becoming a better fly fisher, coming home and writing about it. That's one. That's one model. That's probably maybe that's the most popular model. And we all use it. I certainly have.
Right.
But another model would be, the kind of thing that Chris Dombrowski does, or other writers who are looking for other elements, other larger elements of the fly fishing, what I call the cultural surround around the fly fishing activity. And it could be that those will be as exciting and interesting because they're new. You haven't thought about them quite the same way. And there's a kind of excitement about that. There's a kind of electricity. What Chris reveals in his books, about the sort of the minutia or the background, a cultural background of the Bahamian bone fishing experience and so on. These are wonderful elements that add texture, and they add believability, and they add authority to those kinds of experiences. So that's another kind of story. So it's hard for me to say, what really lights my fire. I think if I had to say one thing, it would be attention to particulars. Get a real honest, grounded feel of what that experience is like to that writer at that moment. A lot of people do that. There's no question about that.
Yeah. You hinted at this a moment ago. I'll ask here. So let's get back to English, and we're gonna get a big, rich alum to endow a new department of English at Ohio University. Who would you want on the faculty of that department? And maybe and who should be the chair? And let's since we're being a little whimsical, they don't even have to be alive still. You don't put anybody on this department.
Well, you hit home because I taught the first literature of fly fishing class ever at Ohio University years ago. It was a senior seminar I think I had about 12 students in it. Only one or two of them had ever even picked up a fly rod. So it was an interesting. They loved it. I gave them casting lessons along. Anyway, it was fun. But one of the high points of that curriculum was that Jim Harrison was here That was in 2002.
Mm-hmm.
He was here at OU that spring for our annual spring literary festival. He was here for 3 or 4 days, and he came into my class, and we had done.
My goodness!
He talked about it. It was a wonderful experience, and he said that wonderful thing. And I know he's repeated it many times before. And he said it's because a number of the students wrote this down in the notebooks. He said it's as hard to write well about fishing as it is about anything else, and he should know. He was right, but I don't know if they were living people. I would want Ted Leeson on the faculty.
Excellent.
I think he's terrific, and if I could, I would want Chris Dombrowski for sure. I think I would want a writer named Todd Davis. Who's, I think, excellent, and is a top-notch angler. Those guys. I think I would want Greg Matthews. Not so much for the literary stuff, but because he's done so much else. He's published many books, so it wouldn't be just the narrative of fishing. It could be the other elements that go into it. It'd be Nick Lyons. He'd be the dean.
Yeah. Perfect.
Department. Yeah. Right. So I know I'm probably forgetting other people.
Well, I'm going to put Bob DeMott on the faculty for sure.
I'd sit in the back row. And there are, I'm trying to think of other really it'll come to me. I'm having a senior moment here, so you put in the corner. But I know there are other people I would want on there.
Sure. Sure. Let's talk about your path to Anglish. And there's an angling path and an English path, and maybe start with the angling path and get us to that point where it started to merge with the English path, and tell us how that one came about.
Well, I started fishing when I was a kid. I grew up in southwestern Connecticut. I'm really about 50 miles from Manhattan. And so in suburban Connecticut, which was a very, upscale, Tony place. I was from a working class family, so we were not. But the thing about growing up in that part of Connecticut was that back in the 50s, there was still a lot of rural area there. I had 3 uncles, my mother's 3 brothers, and they were all avid hunters first and fishermen second. So from the time I was very young, I sort of gravitated to them. We lived all in close proximity. And so I was in the woods or on the water, from the time I was about 5 or 6 years old, doing all kinds of stuff. Cane pole with, bobber when I started, worm fishing. I think I told you one time as I got older, my cousin and I used to snag alewives coming up out of Long Island. For no, I mean, this was the cruelty of youth. I mean, there was you couldn't use them for anything. So we'd get buckets of them, we'd bring them home to my grandparents, and we put them in the garden as fertilizer. And we couldn't eat them. They were just nothing but bone. But as I think of it now, it was just a kind of bizarre background. In there, there'd be thousands of alewives, and they looked like little herring. Or not herring, they looked like little tarpon. They really long. And then you graduate, So by the middle of 1950, by 1956, I had a fly rod, and I was tying my own flies. And I tied up a gray ghost streamer, Carrie Stevens pattern, and I used some of the chicken feathers from my grandmother's chicken coop to tie that fly. And my mother, I wasn't driving. I was only a kid. I was only 13. I couldn't drive yet, so I probably bicycled, or maybe my mother drove me up to the Saugatuck River. And I caught a foot-long brook trout on that streamer. And that was the lightning bolt. it opened a door of possibilities that I never imagined was possible. And since then, I mean, this was before Trout Unlimited, so I had nobody. I had a couple of relatives who were fly fishermen, and one of them was actually he was quite a well-known wildlife artist, Alacrino, and he was a fairly practiced salmon fisherman in Brunswick and Newfoundland. He went up every year, and he was quite an outdoorsman. But I wasn't in that necessarily close proximity to get anything from it. So I learned a lot of this on my own. I just kind of made it up as I went along, and I did things like fish for trout in the Norwalk River or the Saugatuck or the Mianus or a number of other those local streams in Fairfield County. And then I had recourse to a number of ponds in my area that I could walk to or bicycle to. And there were pickerel, largemouth bass, and panfish. So I did a lot of popper fishing, topwater popper fishing. And as I got interested in pickerel, I started doing things like I would catch little frogs and put them on a hook, use my fly. I wrote about this in Angling Days, the catch pickerel, which I loved. They were wonderful. I throw them back. But they were so voracious that you'd hook one, catch it, bring it in, throw it back, and you'd cast again, and that fish would take the fly. By that time, I was using a little popper. They would take the popper. I mean, it was unbelievable. For your confidence, see what a great fly angler I am.
Right.
That's all how it started. And then in the late 50s or so, my parents and one of my uncles bought some property in southern Vermont, and we had the kind of temporary mobile homes on there. But I spent a lot of time up there. I went up. It was only about 4 hours from where we lived in Connecticut up to the camp. This is not too far from the Battenkill, just outside of Manchester. And so we fished. I fished the Battenkill, but I also fished Otter Creek, which is a north-flowing river through Vermont. And then there was a Mill Creek. And then our camps backed up on a little blue line stream called Weatherby Creek. It had little tiny brookies in it. So we fished that a lot. And those were great experiences because there was nobody there. Nobody was that water up there at all. So it was fun. You learned a lot, and you could kind of gauge yourself about how to do it. And that's how it went. I still, at the time, I grew up when I was living in Connecticut. I was right on Long Island Sound, so I did a lot of saltwater fishing too. One of my uncles had a boat, so we did a lot of offshore angling for flatfish, weakfish, which are sea trout, snapper blues, that kind of thing, with bait, sandworms, that kind of stuff. But I also did a lot of casting in South Norwalk and Rowayton off the jetties and stuff with a ultralight spinning rod for a mackerel and snapper blues. That was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that a lot. With a contest line and that was fun. So I did a lot of that. Stripers once in a while, not that often, but once in a while. When you thought about striper, this is back in the 50s and 60s, when you thought about striper fishing in that part of Connecticut, nobody that I knew of was working a fly rod on stripers. The big activity was there was a striped bass club in Westport, which is one of the next towns over to where I was, and they would have these pictures in the summer in the Norwalk Hour of these guys. They all fished at night with big plugs, surf plugs, and they'd have photographs of 45-pound stripers that they took right into the Sound, right in Norwalk, where I was on the North Shore of Long Island Sound. But I never tangled with one of them with a fly rod. They're huge, and that's become that's striper fishing with a fly rod now is on the East Coast deal now. Yeah, it's really, and that's great. It's a great fish. So, and then as you go along, you just I fished a lot with my uncles. and mostly trout fishing. You know, that's what I kind of got started with and pretty much stayed with. And then as the years went by, I had a cousin-in-law. A guy married my cousin, my first cousin, named Earl Duback. He was an engineer from Connecticut. He was an engineer for the Electric Boat Company in New London. And the Electric Boat Company makes all the nuclear subs for the U.S. government. His expertise was sound dampening. So he used to invent all these things. They go out on shakedown cruises. He has wonderful stories about that. He was also a bonzo fly fisherman. I really bonded over that. We fished a lot together out east and in Montana quite a bit. He eventually patented a couple of things. One was the Orvis Trident rod. The other was Orvis Wonderline.
Really?
He developed the Wonderline in his garage with a whole hand set up dipping machine to coat the line. And he would do 5 or 6 or 7, 8 of these experimental ones. And then by that time, I was already coming out to Montana every summer. And he would come out and he'd bring these lines with him and we'd try them out. We'd fish them, hard for whatever time he was there, a week or even longer, from morning till night. He was an avid fisherman. So we got along. We'd start early in the morning. We'd fish till dark. And people kind of it wasn't just that he spurred you on. It was that he was always trying to figure out the answers to all the questions that most fly fishermen have about environment, about trout habits, all those things. And he was just a wonderful compatriot, to fish with, because he was so and in great insight and so on. So that was fun. By that time, that was in the 80s, of course, and into the 90s. And I had started coming out Montana in 88, I think it was. And I've been going out every year since. So, and how long you learn a lot. I mean, I made a gambit with myself years ago. And that was, I love to fish. I lived in a place in southeastern Ohio where trout fishing, I have to drive 4.5 hours to West Virginia to get any trout fishing at all. I was never much interested in going up to the North Country to fish steelhead in Lake Erie because it was just a zoo.
Right.
And so I decided early on I could either I was off in the summer because I was teaching. I could spend my money on a discretionary trip every year, or maybe go to, save up and go for a week to New Zealand or whatever it happened to be. That was one way to do it. The really sexy spots so you could really catch enormous fish. Or I could try to do it myself on more of a budget and go and fish for 4, 5, 6 weeks.
Right. In
the States. And that's what I started to do. And I thought there are a lot of advantages. The disadvantage was there's going to be a big learning curve, obviously. The leap from fishing in Connecticut and Vermont to Wyoming, Colorado, and Montana was huge. I mean, it was almost unimaginable. The first couple of times I went out, it was overwhelming. But you kind of, I'm a great believer in Alfred North Whitehead and the whole notion of process. That's what we're involved in. Process. You keep learning as you go. Or that wonderful Professor A.L. Luce taught at Trinity College in Dublin in that wonderful book called Fishing and Thinking. He says, got this wonderful line. He says, "Fish and find out." Go start. So, and that was kind of a long learning curve, and I made it my business to fish every day. So now when I'm there, I fish try to fish at least 30 days straight.
Mm-hmm.
Never, I could, on my budget as a, as a retired teacher, I could never do that if I went to New Zealand or Iceland. Or it can only be here in the States where I can drive. I can do a lot of my own cooking. Kate and I can cook and blah, 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 do our own housekeeping stuff. And that allows me to fish that much.
Yeah,
so that's been fun, and that's been a great learning curve. And along the way, I'm always want to say this, that you find mentors along the way. And when I was young, uncles, and then in various ways later, Nick Lyons and Jim Harrison was in there too. Both Nick and Jim I was an only child. Both Nick and Jim were like the two older brothers I never otherwise had, and they were profoundly influential to me. But you also meet people along the way. And when I started going out west, I had the good fortune to get in with people who really taught me a lot. One was a guy named Rick Wolam, who now, I first met him in Colorado, but he now is the manager of a fly shop in Emigrant, Montana. I see him every day when I go out. And the other was John Sampson, who for many years was a guide on the Beaverhead and the Big Hole. And now he started with one of his partners at Ruby Springs Lodge in Alder. He had that for a number of years. And now he started several years ago with his wife, the Double R Ranch on the Madison. It's just outside of Ennis. Mm-hmm. He had an enormous, and another one was Danny Laren, who was Jim Harrison's guide for years and years and years. And these were remarkably generous and informative and just fun to be with people. I really learned a lot about the ins and outs of Western fly fishing from them. And there are others as well, but those guys really were at the top of the heap for me. A lot of
So, Bob, what that's the angling path. What about the English path? How, and when did these things intersect?
It's interesting to me because things have changed a lot. I mean, I grew up in an Italian American working class family. Both of my parents worked. And the idea that somebody from my background would become a professional fishing guide was, I might as well thought about flying to the moon, just the cards, because you have all this pressure, whether it's stated or not. It was not stated from my parents. They were terrific, really terrific people. But there is that pressure that you want to do better than they were. My father had an 8th grade education. My mother graduated from high school. So my mother particularly was educated in that way. She was well-read in all of her life. And so it just came to pass that I assumed I would have my other path besides the fishing, which was all I wanted to do, or hunt back then. Already by the time I was 12, I already had bird dogs. So I went to high school, didn't do very well. Went to college. I played hockey in college, and that I had kind of a checkered career there. I was a biology major for a couple of years, and I was faced with having to take organic chemistry for a year, and I knew I would never pass it. So I was sitting around my buddies one night drinking beer, and I had this dilemma. I got to change my major, and this is a true story. One of my compatriots said, "What do you like to do?" And I said, "Well, I like to read." He said, "That's it? You're an English major." I did. I became an English major, and then through the luck of just through the back door, because I was not a very good student, I went on to graduate school, did a master's degree, and then I got a teaching fellowship helped pay the way. And then I got into several PhD programs. I went to Kent State for a couple of reasons. One of them was I was interested in working on Melville, and they had one of the great Melville scholars, Howard Vincent, was teaching at Kent State, and I wanted to work with him.
Mm-hmm.
And their stipend was quite big. It was one of the largest PhD stipends in the U.S. And I was married at the time, had a baby, and so I needed to have that thing. So I took that route. I was serious about it, you know, and that led me, you know, down the academic route. So I taught for 45 years at our university and published 24 books, and you know, became an acclaimed authority on, or whatever you want to call it, on John Steinbeck. I did quite a few books on him.
How'd that come about? How did you?
I had as an undergraduate, I went to a private men's Catholic college, which I had a real love-hate relationship with because I'd never been to a Catholic school before. Anyway, I got suspended once. I got kicked off campus. So I had a very checkered career. And but there were two younger assistant professors in American literature. I had taken classes from both of them. One of the things I had to do, I needed a language requirement to graduate. I took German, but I also had to write a senior thesis. I had no idea what I was going to do. And I went to one of the younger professors, and we talked for a while. And he said, why don't you read some John Steinbeck? You might like that. So I've told this story a number of times. In October of 1964 was my beginning of my senior year. I was living off campus because I wasn't allowed to live on campus. And so I drove on my way to hockey practice. I left about 2 hours early, drove up to the college, went to the library, went up in the stacks, and looked for the Steinbeck section. And I'd read, you know, I couldn't even remember what I'd read by Steinbeck in high school. I didn't recall. So I looked at these books. And there were a bunch of them. And there was a book called Travels with Charlie. And I took it down and I started paging through it. And what I realized was, it was about a dog, which right away was interesting because I had hunting dogs. You know, by that time I had hunting dogs for 8 years. I was maybe 20 at the time. And then he talks about, when he starts, early in the book, he talks about delaying his exit from Long Island, where he was living, Sag Harbor, because Hurricane Donna was coming up the East Coast, and it went across Long Island. And of course, he was right in Long Island, so he had to batten everything down. But I remembered Hurricane Donna because it came right through our town, and I was on the north shore of Long Island Sound. Did a lot of devastating damage. Now this is the point. It was the first time in my life as an English major I'd ever read anything where the writer had written about something I had experienced myself. I mean, it was like that, catching that brook trout on a fly, of my own fly, that just opened a door. I just was astonished. And so I started to read all of his work. I wrote a thesis. It was terrible. I burned every copy I could get my hands on after that. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing, you know, but it sort of started a fire in me, and I got so much so that about a year ago, when my most recent book on Steinbeck came out in 2022, it's a book about various aspects of Steinbeck, but it also has my favorite chapter of all in there is a chapter about Steinbeck the fisherman. Quite an avid fisherman, so I was the first one to ever. I shine up my star here because I was the first one ever to really delve deeply into Steinbeck as a fisherman. It was quite fun. That book came out. I sent a copy to one of the deans at the college, and I said, "No one will remember me there. I've been gone so long. I graduated 58 years ago. But if I just want to I wanted somebody to know that all of my Steinbeck research started at Assumption College in the mid 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
I said, just give the book to the library. About 2 weeks later, the dean writes me a letter and said, "This is fascinating. We would love to have you come and give a talk to the students." So last year I went out and did that, and it was great. I hadn't been back, in 58 years, whatever it was.
Right.
The campus was now Assumption University, and when I was there, it was 600 students, men. Now it's co-ed, it's about 4,000, maybe around that. It's a pretty big school now. So I gave this talk, and 8 of my class of 1965 college classmates came to the lecture. And I said to many people, it was one of the high points of my academic life. I mean, it was just like a circle went around and closed. I never would have imagined that it would have been. So I put that right up there with all the the great fish I've
Yeah.
the great bird dogs I've had. I mean, it was just wonderful. And then they followed it up, and completely unbeknownst to me, about 5-6 months ago, I got a letter from the president of Assumption. They said they wanted to give me an honorary doctorate. And this blew me. I wrote back to him. I said, I was suspended from school, and I was kept up. And he said, I've heard some of the stories about you and there are 5 of us, bunch of 5 of us, who were all cohorts, and we all were complete screw-ups. Every one of them went on to have a professional career in law, medicine, academia, and so on. So much for, not screwing up to go along. But anyway, so Kate and I went out back in May, and I got an honorary degree. And so it's just one of those things you never imagined would come. So that's sort of the end product of the other strain.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Hey, Bob, I'm going to put a little plug in for if anyone who has read Travels with Charlie. The audiobook, the narrator is Gary Sinise, and it is spectacular. He does such a great job, and I know, and can you comment? He's a big Steinbeck fan.
He was. He was in the remake of Mice and Men. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, but that's a great. Some audiobooks don't work, but that one worked really well.
Yes, I know. They did a couple of audiobooks of a couple of my earlier books, and I they were terrible. So people just don't get, if they don't get the timbre of your language or your prose, it can be a disaster. So anyway.
Yeah. Right. So how you talked about the 2 big brothers that you didn't have early in life, but met them late in life, Jim Harrison and Nick Lyons. Do you have any stories you care to tell about outings with either of them?
Well, my favorite story of Nick was, because he wrote me that note when I sent that Ezra Pound piece to Fly Fisherman. It was a wonderful note. And I didn't see much of Nick for a number of years afterwards. Occasionally we'd keep in touch. Of course, I followed his work. And then when I was doing that, I lost myself. How do I get back on?
You're on.
I am? Okay, I can't see myself, though. I switched something. Wait a minute. Oh, there I am. Okay. Okay, got it. When I was planning that course on the literature of fly fishing to teach you, I knew Nick well enough to write to him and ask him about his suggestions and so on. And then right after that, I had the opportunity to see him a number of times. He was given an award and it was held, I think it was held at the Yale Club, and he invited me as his guest. And we got to, and after that, we just really got to be friendly. My favorite story of Nick, I just saw him last month, for his birthday. My favorite story was he had a friend who had a pond, spring-fed pond in Woodstock, and it was stocked with all kinds of fish, but some enormous, triploid rainbows of 8 or 9 pounds. And the guy, and I can't remember who it was, but he had a barrel of fish pellets. And so Nick and I went out and fished it one day with standard traditional, flies and stuff. Didn't do anything. Didn't catch a fish. And Nick said, "Okay, watch this." He goes in the little cubbyhole of the storeroom and gets a handful of pellets, and brings them out, throws them in the water, and in a nanosecond, the water is boiling with these enormous trout. They're like 25, 27, 28 inches. And then he presents to me his pellet fly, which he wrote a piece about in Fly Fisherman. I mentioned in Angling Days. And he said, "Here, try this." So he, through very elaborate procedure, he had finally figured a way to kind of shave down a piece of cork so it would adhere to a hook and make it look like a pellet. Mm-hmm. So my first cast, he handed me his rod. My first cast, an enormous rainbow took it. And it was, I had it in my right hand. He's a right-hand winder. I'm a left-hand winder. And as I took it, the reel started to scream. I couldn't get my right hand over on it fast enough to break it. And he went to the other end of the pond and snapped me off. But I kept thinking, and I said, here we are, one of the world's foremost experts on the fine points of fly fishing. And here we are throwing a pellet fly at stock fish. So, but it was delightfully absurd, but he had such a great sense of humor. So much fun. And we've remained friends ever since. He's been just a real presence in my life. Thank God. Just going strong at 93, but not so much physically, but certainly mentally, actively, and artistically, and so on. And with Jim, it was a little bit different. I was teaching a graduate class in the mid 90s. One of my PhD classes was on the American novella, and I taught Jim's Legends of the Fall and the 2 other novellas that are in there. And I had a graduate student, a PhD student, who came up to me after one of the seminars, and he said, I would really like to write my dissertation on Harrison. And I said, well, yeah, that'd be good. Not much has been done. And he said, do you think we could ever get to meet him? I'd like to interview him. I said, well, I'll see. So as it turned out, I had a grant from the university to go to one of the Key West literary festivals in January of '96, because I was also working up a course on environmental literature, and this was a 3-day class in Key West on the literature of the environment. I thought this is ideal. I got some money to go. Jim was one of the speakers, and after one of the sessions, everybody was kind of mixed and greeting and having a drink and so on, and he was there. And I walked up to him and I introduced myself, and I said, I directed a master's thesis on your work a number of years ago. I said, I have a PhD student who wants to write a dissertation on you. And I said, is there any chance that we could come and just interview you so he could get some information? And we got talking, and he asked me what I did, and that was right at the time when I was working with probably the single best English setter I've ever had. She was just an absolute world-class grouse dog. And so I mentioned that to him, and of course his eyes lit up, and we started talking. We were talking about bird hunting. I said, I've been doing it all my life. I had all these dogs. And of course he was on and on. And so when we got done talking, he said, here's my assistant's number. You call her and let's see if we can't set something up. And that was Joyce Bailey. He called Joyce, and as it turned out, our schedules didn't. That was '96. Our schedules didn't mesh that year. But the following year, in '97, he had some open time. He was still in Michigan. He was still in Lake Leelanau.
Uh-huh.
And so Patrick Smith, my student, and I went up and we spent a weekend with him in the summer of '97. And we started to interview him. And then we went back the following year. And during that time, of course, we did a lot of exchanging of letters. And I sent him copies of my book. He gave me copies of his books and so on, so on, so on. And he really liked Patrick. He was easy to like. He was just a terrific guy. And so Patrick and I we got all this audio tape, and we made up. We did a transcript of it. I had graduate students at the time, and they had their part of their program was to do research work. So this was part of it, and they typed up this transcript of his, and it was like 200 pages of this interview. It was the longest interview ever done with Jim. And so over the years, we whittled it down. It became one of the centerpieces of that book I did, Conversations with Jim Harrison, about 2002.
Mm-hmm.
And that that's how it got started. And then Jim found out at one of our meetings that Patrick was leaving Athens, Ohio, to go to Gainesville, Florida, because his wife had taken an administrator's job at Florida State. She was pretty connected, and so he was talking to Jim about it. We were sitting around at Jim's writing studio, and he said, "Florida, eh? Yeah, I'll have to introduce you to my friend Guy," which is Valdane. And sure enough, when Patrick got down there in Tallahassee, he, through Jim's good offices, this is the way Jim was, he's so generous, he got hooked up with Patrick. And Patrick and his wife ended up renting one of the houses on one of Guy's properties.
Wow.
And they became very, very close friends. So they hunted together, they fished together, they played tennis together. Patrick was a phenomenally good athlete, really gifted athlete. And they just got along beautifully. And so, it was just one of those things that mesh. Who knows why? And it just worked out well. And then meantime, of course, I started, when I was going to Montana, I started fishing every year with Jim. I did that for about 12 years. And at one point, when I had my drift boat, this is when he was living in Livingston, I used to leave it behind his writing studio, so I didn't have to haul it all the way back to Ohio every summer. And then my first stop would be, when we went back the following summer, my first stop would be at Jim's, it would be at Livingston. And then we'd stay a few days in Livingston. Or earlier, I used to just stay with Jim and Linda. And that got harder and harder to do. And so Kate and I would get a room nearby or in Livingston and so on. And then we'd stay a couple days and spend time with them. And then I'd pick up my boat and I'd trail it down over to the Madison, where I would keep it, for as long as I was there. And then I'd haul it back to Jim's. And then usually on the way back, I'd leave it at his place, and then we'd stay 3 or 4 days in Livingston. And I'd get a couple of days on the spring creeks, and Jim and I we'd fish another couple times on the Yellowstone with Danny. So it was just one of those wonderful things that kind of fell together. I write about my time with Jim a number of times in angling days. It was unforgettable. There was never anybody like him. He was just an absolute. You think of the people. I don't know. He was not a pretty boy. Like Gene Hackman or Earl Haggard or or Jim Harrison. They were all in a group together. I mean, they're just one of a kind people. Fabulous to spend time with.
So, Bob, I got a question for you and maybe this gets at why fishing writing is so hits so many emotions for people. A lot of people, probably many of our listeners, perhaps have a poster on their wall somewhere, or maybe it's on their computer that would have this quote: "Many go fishing all their lives without knowing it is not the fish they are after." And it's attributed to Thoreau. And I think you're the person who first told me that that's a misquote. And so my first question is, do you think, let's talk about how that came about, but given that it's a misquote, is this the biggest misquote in all of fly fishing?
It could very well be. Let me tell you what the irony of this is. I wrote my PhD dissertation on Thoreau. And it was one of those things where you read everything by a writer, all 20 volumes, and at some point you're sure that he said that. He did not. And that was called to my attention by somebody a scholar from Utah in a recent issue of the American Fly Fisher. And I was presented as one of the people who was the egregious perpetuator of that idea. And so that forced me to go back and look through Thoreau. And I wrote an article, a little piece in the American Fly Fisher about that is not a Thoreauvian quotation, but it is very close to a couple of things he did say, particularly in his journals. And it's still, it's one of those things now where I don't think it can be stamped out. I mean, it's still, I even was looking back in angling days the other day, and I found that I used it in there. This was in 2016. Mm-hmm. I hadn't been enlightened yet, but no, I was so embarrassed because I should have known better, but I didn't. So anyway, but it's a great sounding quotation, and people really respond to it. So
oh yeah.
Tells you a lot about the metaphysical aspects of fly fishing. They're pursuing something.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It reminds me of one of the many Yogi Berra isms, where Yogi supposedly said, "Half of the things I did not say, half of the things I said." Yeah. Well.
More of those.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've had you for quite a while here, Bob, and I want to thank you for being here. But I want to just ask a few questions, a few kind of quick questions to take us out. Let's start talking about Montana a bit. What is the number one in all of the years you've been going to Montana for a month at least in the summer? What's the biggest change you've seen over those years?
It's greater commercialism and just busier waterways. And I don't know what can be done to stem that. It's on so many people's bucket lists, and it's on so many people's notion of the ideal angling spot with good reason. It's most of the water you're going to encounter are wild fish. Mm-hmm. Stockers not allowed, and it's exciting. The terrain is beautiful, but it sure has gotten busier. And I think that's for me, it's one of the advantages of being able to try to fish at least 30 or 35 days every summer, because if I find a place or time that's a little bit more busy, I don't have to worry about cursing everybody out because I've got to go home to catch the plane to go home tomorrow. I'm going to be there the following week, and I get plenty of chance to have opportunities. And I fish till dark every night anyway. A lot of times, if I go down to the river at 5:30 and I stay till 10, I don't have. There are not many people fishing with me, even on the Madison, and that's one of the great things about the Madison. It's a glorious, glorious river. But you can certainly find those little niches where you can have a stretch of water to yourself, and with rising fish, it's just absolutely wonderful.
If you had to pick a boat or wade, which would you pick?
Well, I couldn't. I do wade most of the time. I sold my drift boat, but there's nothing. For instance, I have a friend that I fish with every year on the Beaverhead, and we float. And I fish about every other year. Danny Laren and I get together, and we float the Yellowstone in his boat. So there are certain, in the Beaverhead particularly, I think I would rather float than anything else. But 99% of my life is walk and wade. I love to fish out of the boat if it's the right water.
Okay. What you wrote about an event where you went from dry land to in the water in the river, fell in. How many times have you fallen in a river in Montana?
Well, I tell you, I was just thinking about that the other day. That was an experience. I think that was I was hooked to a really nice brown trout in the Madison above $3 bridge, and it was not a very difficult place to wade. It was kind of pebbly, not bouldery, and my feet went out from under me, and I took a dive. I have a section of it in Angler Days about that.
Right.
I had just gotten a new rod for my becoming a life member of TU, and when I got out of the water, the rod was gone, and I ran downstream looking for it. Couldn't find it, and it was hooked to this brown was about 19 inches, so it was a pretty hefty. It must have been. So I kept, my fantasy was that some 12-year-old kid walking along the bank somewhere around maybe in Ennis, splashing around, and went down to see what was going on, and there was a brand new fly rod outfit attached to him, and he picked it up and became a fly fisherman. That was a long time ago. I fell in last year once, and that was the first time in 13 or 14 years. And the difference is, during all that time since I fell in that time in the Madison, I never go in the water without a wading staff. And when I was guiding at Elk Springs, I always had extra wading staffs for my clients. Didn't want to take any chances walking because that's really slippery stuff over in the Elk River. And then this last summer, I did not a complete dousing, but I did take a douse. My foot slipped in mud, and I was kind of looking the other way, and I went down. I didn't get a complete dousing, but I was. So it just reminds you how to keep your composure,
right? Where
you're moving, where you're stepping every step. I don't wade at 80. I just don't wade in real deep water anymore. When I was younger, I wade right, as you know, we all do this.
Right. And
chest deep, you'd wade, to get over to another side of the spot. Not anymore. So.
Yeah. If someone made a ridiculous rule and told you that on this trip to Montana you can only fish spring creeks or freestones, which one are you going to pick?
Spring creeks.
Yeah. And if you could only fish one spring creek, which would it be?
Well, I've become very fond of Nelson's. There's up there, and then there's another one up near Ennis that I have permission to fish that I probably is my favorite. Those two would be right at the top. It's one of those things. You know this well, Tim. You start off when you're a fly fisher. You have an arc. You catch just one fish. Then you want to catch as many fish as you can. Then you want to catch just the biggest fish. These steps take years to develop.
Right.
And all you want is the most difficult fish that you can find. And that, that's pretty much where I am now. I want the most challenging fish, and fooling a brown 18, 19, 20 inches on 8X tippet on Nelson's. It to me is on a sighted nymph with no indicator is just about the pinnacle of fly fishing for me anyway. And that's why.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, yeah. I like I love the Spring Creek idea because it's like fishing in a laboratory because you can see so much. The water's clear. You really can watch the whole process of bugs emerging and fish moving, setting up in current lanes and so on. It's just a fantastic kind of thing. Anyway, so I have a mantra about fishing.
Yeah.
Read it at the end. One little thing.
Sure. We'll do that. Absolutely.
I caught, stripers, redfish, bonefish, never a permit. Little Atlantic salmon and a lot of bass and sunnies and blue and everything else. So this is why I love trout. This is a little section from angling days.
Sure.
Perhaps it has something to do with the size, because most trout are scaled in the right proportion to their habitat. Perhaps it has something to do with beauty, because all trout are colored like resplendent hand-painted artifacts. Perhaps it has something to do with geography, because trout tend to live in Earth's desirable places. Perhaps it has something to do with environment, because trout are prime indicators of water's organic health, in which we all have a stake. Perhaps it has something to do with books and paintings, because the extensive written and iconographic records on trout are among the absolute glories of sporting literature and art. And then perhaps it is simple as saying that in their welcoming familiarity as a species, trout suit my sensibility, speak directly to my temperament. I understand other anglers' similar and sometimes exclusive fascination with tarpon, salmon, bonefish, or permit as exalted species that signify the meaning of what the fly fishing pursuit and mania are all about. And I say more power to them, fish and men. But I am content and comfortable to keep my focus most of the time, anyway, riveted on trout. That's my story of monogamous attraction, and I'm sticking to it.
Excellent. I think in the we can't top that. We have to quit there. That's too tough to follow with anything else. So, Bob, thank you.
Together, that's the fishing skein and the writing skein right there.
Right there, perfect. We couldn't
impulses, yeah. So
we can't pick anything better to end with.
Okay.
But thank you, Bob, so much for taking the time to chat with me. And a lot of times when I end these things, I tell the guests that I would like to see them next time on a river. In this case, I know I'm going to see you in about a month.
We'll see you in a few weeks. Yeah, we got some fishing to do. Okay.
All right, Bob. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.